Imagine a secret U.S. government plan to stage terrorist attacks, fake casualties, and then blame it all on another country. It sounds like a Hollywood movie plot, right? But it was real. A real official proposal signed by the highest levels of the U.S. military.
CIA to be carried out by the CIA to commit acts of terrorism on Americans and blame them on Cuba. So JFK, the president, rejected.
Asking for permission to execute a plan to lob mortar shells into their own military bases with some damage to installations, and then to make hijacking attempts against civilian air and surface craft. They're proposing to blow up a U.S. ship in the U.S. naval base.
It was called Operation Northwoods, a plan so shocking that even the President of the United States said no. Buried for decades, hidden in classified files, until it was finally exposed to the world. This is the conspiracy that actually almost happened, and barely anyone talks about it. In 1962, top U.S. military officials proposed a plan that sounds like something out of a Hollywood thriller. It was called Operation Northwoods, and it was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The goal? To trick the American public into supporting a full-scale invasion of Cuba. How? By staging fake terrorist attacks on American soil. One proposal involved blowing up a U.S. ship near Cuba and blaming it on Castro. Another? Hijacking commercial airliners and faking passenger deaths.
Why haven't we turned? Huh?
If we don't turn soon, people will die.
They even considered staging a mass shooting in Miami and planting evidence that linked it to Cuban agents. These weren't fringe ideas. They were written, signed, and sent to the Secretary of Defense, and they were one signature away from happening.
Operation Northwoods was a response to a problem the U.S. government had. They called it the Cuba problem. Cuba became a problem for the CIA when they watched this young activist with an affinity for cigars lead a communist revolution on the island, throwing out the American-friendly dictator and nationalizing all the valuable land and industries that American businesses had been getting rich off for decades. This was the Cold War, and communism was now 90 miles away.
This wasn't just a plan. It was a blueprint for psychological warfare against the American people. One operation suggested blowing up a U.S. Navy ship right off the coast of Cuba, then flooding the headlines with images of grieving families, funerals for sailors who never actually died, the bodies, faked, the outrage, engineered. Another proposal? Hijack a commercial jet filled with college students. At least, that's what the public would believe. Behind the scenes, the real passengers would be secretly removed, replaced with a drone. Then the drone would be intentionally destroyed mid-flight and blamed on Fidel Castro's government. They even brainstormed staging a mass shooting in Miami, then planning evidence to tie it all back to Cuban agents. Gunfire in American streets, all for a false narrative. These weren't ideas scribbled by some rogue agent. This was signed off by America's top military leadership, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it was just one signature away from becoming real. That signature? President John F. Kennedy. He said no, and just over a year later, he was assassinated. Coincidence or a warning to anyone who stands in the way?
Were involved in the cover-up of the assassination. Because, when you break down all the various people that you document, everyone from Arlen Specter to everyone that's on the Warren Commission's report, it's very clear that those folks had to know that what they were doing was bullshit. From what you said about the FBI chain of custody for the magic bullet to the alteration of the autopsy photos and the difference between
the autopsy itself.
Yes, the autopsy itself. The difference between the Dallas autopsy and the way they looked at it at Bethesda, Maryland.
There was no autopsy in Dallas. It was just
the examination of the
It was very
body.
quick, the tracheotomy.
Yeah. President John F. Kennedy saw the plan and said no. He read the proposals. Bombings, hijackings, mass murder, all staged to deceive the American people. His response? A firm rejection. He refused to manipulate the public into war, but that defiance, it made enemies, powerful ones. Because Kennedy wasn't just rejecting Northwoods, he was at war with the intelligence community. He fired CIA Director Allen Dulles after the Bay of Pigs disaster. He vowed to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And then, just over a year later, JFK was shot in broad daylight. Officially, it was a lone gunman. Unofficially, there were whispers of inside jobs, magic bullets, and deep state revenge. Some believe Northwoods was the final straw, proof that the military-industrial complex had gone rogue, and that Kennedy's days were numbered the moment he stood in their way. Was his assassination a coincidence, or the consequence of saying no to the most dangerous plan never carried out? For years, Operation Northwoods wasn't just classified, it was buried. Not just hidden, erased, tucked away in the shadows of government archives, sealed behind layers of red tape, deception, and silence. No one was ever supposed to find it. Not the public, not the press, not even most of Congress. It was the kind of plan whispered behind closed doors, where power moves in secret and deniability is the real currency. But then, the cracks started to show. In the 1990s, a wave of declassified documents began leaking into the light. Most were routine, harmless, boring, but buried among them, a single file, so outrageous, so unthinkable that researchers thought it had to be fake. Except it wasn't. Operation Northwoods, drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, approved by the top military brass, presented to the Secretary of Defense. The plan? To stage fake terrorist attacks right here in the United States, blow up American ships, hijack U.S. planes, kill innocent civilians, and then blame it all on Cuba. Let that sink in. The U.S. military planned to murder its own citizens, to start a war, all to manipulate public opinion, all to justify an invasion that had already been decided behind closed doors. And the most chilling part? It nearly happened. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is declassified fact. The signatures are real, the memos are real, the intent, undeniable. But here's the catch. Most people have never heard of it. Why? Because the truth was quietly swept back under the rug, buried in silence, dismissed, forgotten. But what else is still buried? If the government once considered faking terrorist attacks to trick its own people, what else have they done? What else are they willing to do?
Oswald could have never made that shot. Of course he could have. 100% he could have. Is it likely? Listen, people throw three-point shots that have no fucking business on a basketball court and they hit nothing but net.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not likely that a guy could get off 3 shots that quick, but it is possible.
Right. There was more time.